Good afternoon, everyone, and a warm welcome to all of you joining us online here today. My name is Anna Wislander, and I'm Director for Northern Europe at the Atlantic Council and head of our office in Stockholm. We opened the office in 2016 with a mission to forge a strong US Northern European agenda in light of the worsened security situation in the Baltic Sea region. And together with the Europe Center at the Atlantic Council, we promote leadership, strategies, and analysis to ensure a strong, ambitious, and forward-looking transatlantic partnership. As a Swede, I'm very pleased to open today's launch of the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative, and in particular to have with us Her Excellency, the Swedish Minister for Climate and Environment, Annika Strandhäll, as a keynote speaker. Varmt välkommen till Atlantic Council. Both the Swedish and the United States have high ambitions for reducing CO2 emissions and driving the transitions towards a greener society. We are already close partners in green innovation and novel technology with multiple collaborations between academia, industry, and startup ecosystems. And this new initiative will accelerate Swedish-American partnerships even further. By combining resources under a common umbrella, the Green Transition Initiative will act as a hub for Swedish and US companies to drive research and innovation for a more sustainable world. And what better place to launch this initiative than the Atlantic Council? For over 60 years, the Council has brought together transatlantic partners to find solutions to common threats and challenges. And few challenges pose a greater threat than climate change and the transition to a green economy. There is hope through initiatives like the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative to mitigate the impact of climate change. Doing so will require cooperation among all sectors of society represented here today. And I will now give the word to George Frampton, Distinguished Fellow with the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center, who will introduce those representatives who are working tirelessly towards a greener, cleaner, and safer world and moderate the discussion. Please enjoy, and thank you once again for joining us.
Annalise, thank you. I'm George Frampton. I'm a senior fellow at the Global Energy Center at the Atlantic Council and run a program in transatlantic climate policy. And we're really delighted to be here today to join our partners, the Sweden Environment Ministry and the Department of Energy in the US, to help introduce this new bilateral initiative between the two countries, the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative. So this afternoon, hopefully you'll hear some timely discussion by both Swedish and American stakeholders, public and private, about how the two countries can work better together. We're going to have two keynote remarks. First from Anders Strandhäll, Sweden's Minister of Climate and Environment, and then from Julie Cicada, Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Energy at the U.S. Energy Department. They're both with us here at the Atlantic Council offices in Washington. And then we'll have five very senior speakers involved in key aspects of the energy transition in both Sweden and the U.S. Talk to you, but you'll hear from them virtually. So bear with us with this in-person and virtual program. Housekeeping, the event is on the record. We're live streaming to Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. We encourage you to post about today's discussion. Use the hashtag ACEEnergy and tag us at AC Global Energy. Those of you who are on Zoom will have a chance to submit questions on the portal, and we'll try to get to as many of those as we can. So Minister Anna Strandhäll has a very rich experience in Sweden in labor policy, social policy issues, and actually has been in charge of two ministries, both Social Security ministry and the Health and Social Policy ministry before she became the Minister of Climate and Environment in 2021. So thank you very much for being with us today.
Well, thank you so much, Mr. Frampton, for that introduction. And also let me thank the organizers of this event. I'm very happy to be here today, and this is my fourth and last day of my stay here in the United States this time. And I think that this seminar really highlights what we have been trying to stress in all our meetings here, namely, how can we increase and deepen our climate cooperation with the United States? And this seminar marks the official launch of the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative. The objective of the initiative is to increase cooperation between Sweden and the US in the area of climate transition. We welcome the US ambition to be a key player in reducing global CO2 emissions and drive the transition to a greener society. The US infrastructure bill shows a clear commitment to do that. Vital industries such as transportation, electricity generation, industry and the building sector together represent almost 80% of total greenhouse gas emissions. Partnerships between countries at the forefront of sustainability and green technology will be key to success of their transition. We see true benefits for Sweden and US stakeholders to work together too in these areas. The Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative will facilitate new and deepen already existing partnerships between different actors such as academia, companies, and government agencies. We will seek to collaborate on innovation, demonstration, policy development, and hopefully also much more. Through these collaborations, I hope that we jointly can develop new innovative solutions and at the same time generate new green jobs, both here in the US, but also in Sweden, of course. This is an important piece in the jigsaw puzzle to facilitate the just transition towards a more sustainable society. The United States is the largest and fastest growing market in absolute numbers for the Swedish export companies. Swedish companies are also large investors in the US with approximately $61 billion in 2019. And Sweden is one of the most innovative countries within the green energy, green efficiency, and fossil-free industry, and is therefore well positioned to accelerate the green transition in the US within sectors such as electromobility, renewable energy, sustainable industry, and green buildings. Sweden and the US are also partners in innovation and novel technology, with multiple collaborations between academia, research, and the industry and startup ecosystems. As an example, Sweden is pleased to collaborate with the US within the Leadership Group for Industry Transition, LEAD IT as we call it, where we aim to lower emissions in heavy industry. The Green Transition Initiative will build on and expand the participating organizations' existing activities within the green transition, ranging from the power sector to sustainable buildings, by increasing access, improving visibility, and promoting co-creation. The initiative will consist of 4 people. 3 of them will be based in Washington, D.C., and 1 in Silicon Valley, and initially run for a period of 3 years. And our team here will have backup at home from the 3 founding agencies, the Swedish Energy Agency, the Innovation Agency Vinnova, and Business Sweden, who we all are committed to the initiative. I truly hope that this initiative will increase our cooperation in this area, and not only to increased bilateral trade and investments between Sweden and the US, but most importantly, to reduce global emissions of greenhouse gases. I would like to end by wishing the Green Transition Initiative all the best. and I hope it will generate a number of new sustainable partnerships. Thank you, and back to you, Mr. Frampton.
Thank you very much. Our second keynote speaker, Julie Cicada, has a remarkable experience in building partnerships and coalitions and networks, both in government and the private sector. Most recently, working with the governors of a lot of the U.S. states to try to promote an ambitious national climate policy in the absence of the federal government over the last 4 years. And she is the Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of the International Affairs branch of the U.S. Department of Energy. Julie?
Thank you, George. Minister Strandhal, colleagues from the Atlantic Council, thank you for the opportunity to join you today to discuss how we can accelerate the transition to a clean energy economy. We could not be gathering at a more important time for the future of clean energy as we climb our way out of 3 existential crises. The climate crisis continues to grow with intensity, threatening our communities, ecosystems, and infrastructure. The COVID-19 global health crisis upended lives in every possible way. The loss of life has been staggering. Early job losses and supply chain disruptions slowed economies everywhere. And now the energy security crisis in Europe, a result of Putin's unprovoked attack on the Ukrainian people, has revealed how our reliance on fossil fuels, especially from maligned actors, leaves us vulnerable to the weaponization of energy. This war threatens the national and energy security interests not only of our allies in Europe, but of all of us. And so to emerge from these crises, we need to redraw the energy landscape to transform the global energy system, working in partnership with each other. I want to thank the Minister for her remarks and to just say how excited I am to see the launch of the Sweden-US Green Transition Initiative, which promises to be an important contribution to the global clean energy transition. This effort will build upon the close ties that we have as nations and will foster deeper collaboration between our people and our scientists. The path to a clean energy future really demands that we work together to release the collective power of innovation. The Green Transition Initiative seeks to expand on partnerships in e-mobility, renewable energy, sustainable industry, and green buildings. And the United States is making fast progress to deploy renewables, but we are still far behind in these other sectors. And we are going to benefit from working with our Swedish counterparts who have a long history of leading on climate action, from ambitious government targets to industry action. As the minister mentioned, Sweden, along with India, was instrumental in standing up the leadership group for industry transition, which will tackle the sectors that are hardest to abate. And the progress that you are making, for example, on producing clean steel at commercial scale is remarkable. Sweden has been instrumental in multilateral fora like Mission Innovation, as well as numerous bilateral initiatives where our brightest minds have collaborated on basic and applied sciences. So I am thrilled that this new initiative will give us yet another opportunity to deepen this collaboration and deliver tangible results that put us that much closer to achieving our climate and clean energy goals. Climate change poses a generational challenge, but it's also a generational opportunity. The United States is leveraging our climate leadership to build a better America. Embedded within the energy transition is a $23 trillion opportunity for clean technologies and millions of good-paying jobs, especially for workers who are undergoing the transition. And as you know, President Biden has made climate leadership a bedrock priority of his administration, and that is both for his domestic and his international climate agenda. The administration has bold plans that will put the U.S. on an irreversible path to addressing the climate crisis. The United States target is to reduce carbon emissions by 50% by the end of this decade, to produce 100% clean energy by 2035, and to achieve net zero emissions by 2050. I know that may not sound like a lot for a country that in 2017 had already passed into law one of the world's most ambitious climate targets, but those are really big goals that are going to require deploying at scale the solutions that exist today and innovating for the solutions of tomorrow. At DOE, our secretary has dubbed 2022 the year of implementation. The marker that she laid down aims to kickstart this critical decade of action. And DOE is well positioned to be the vanguard of climate action in America. The bipartisan infrastructure law provides $62 billion to DOE. That is a once-in-a-generation investment in our nation's infrastructure. The funding will enable DOE to play a critical role in the energy transition. It provides $8 billion for regional clean hydrogen hubs, provides $10 billion for carbon capture, direct air capture hubs, and industrial emission reductions, and it will provide tens of billions of dollars for other energy programs. A few examples include $2.5 billion for advanced nuclear, $2 billion for loans and grants to expand CO2 transportation infrastructure, and a whopping $84 million for geothermal demonstrations. This is where the private sector is essential to making this transition a success. The bipartisan infrastructure funding is intended to work in partnership with industry and to advance our mutual decarbonization goals. Bringing down the costs of these linchpin technologies is a necessary component to make them commercially viable and competitive with carbon-intensive options. At DOE, we launched the Energy Earthshots, which is an all-hands-on-deck call for innovation, collaboration, and acceleration into a clean energy economy. It seeks to tackle the toughest remaining technology barriers to quickly demonstrate and deploy emerging clean technologies at scale. And under the Energy Earthshots, DOE defined a series of performance targets and will leverage the expertise at American universities, in industry, and across our 17 national labs in order to accelerate research and development into these critical technologies. DOE set tough yet achievable targets to transform these technologies over the next 10 years, lowering costs, raising performance standards, creating new jobs, and clearing the way to our clean energy goals. The first Earthshot we announced was the Hydrogen Shot, which sets an ambitious target of $1 per 1 kilogram of clean hydrogen within just 1 decade. That 1 for 1 in 1 is an 80% reduction in cost from today. The second Earthshot focuses on long-duration storage and aims within this decade to cut storage costs by 90% from today for systems that will deliver 10 or more hours of duration. And the third Earthshot is the carbon negative shot, which will develop within a decade durable and scalable carbon dioxide removal technologies for negative emissions under $100 per metric ton. CDR is essential to achieving carbon neutrality in 2050, even as we as the United States prioritize aggressive greenhouse gas reductions. And these domestic efforts dovetail nicely with our international partnerships, such as the Hydrogen CDR and Hydrogen Missions in Mission Innovation. But DOE and the public sector generally can only drive part of the solution. The private sector plays an integral role in making the energy transition possible. The follow-on investment from the private sector is a critical element to getting these technologies into markets. Investors are demanding climate action and clamoring for ideas that will lead the transition, and private companies are driving change. This is the key, where both government and industry are aligned in a long-term vision. Companies have banded together to put forth the best ideas and approaches to the energy transition. They're setting their own ambitious climate goals, sending demand signals to incentivize innovation, and investing in the technologies to meet this global challenge. The First Movers Coalition is a great example of this collective movement. Companies in the coalition commit to buying zero-emission goods and services, helping to drive demand for low-carbon technologies and enabling the building of the supply chains of the future. We at DOE are committed to using the resources at hand to make this energy transition possible, and cooperation amplifies those effects. Together, we will make it work for everyone. Thank you very much. And back over to you, George.
Julie, thank you very much for being here today and for your words. Now we have 5 distinguished participants who are each going to talk and maybe have some discussion and take questions. and I'll introduce them all five and then start off. Andreas Regnell is the Senior Vice President and Head of Strategic Development at Vattenfall. Emma Nierenheim is the Chief Environmental Officer at Northvolt. Robert Andren is Director General of the Swedish Energy Agency. Genevieve Sauer is a Senior Researcher in Mechanical Engineering at NREL, the National Renewable Energy Lab. And John Bosell is President and CEO of CalStart. And Andreas, I'm going to start with you. I know you may have to leave a little bit before the end of our program today. And Vattenfall has a pretty big footprint in Europe, and was one of the founding members, I guess, one of the 4 Swedish companies that joined with the First Movers Coalition, which Julie mentioned, to try to move forward in creating a green markets. I'd love it if you could talk a little bit about your view of the First Movers Coalition, and also what is it that you think the Swedish government and Swedish companies are looking to for the U.S. If the cooperation is enhanced, what can the U.S. do with you to make progress on climate ambition?
Thanks a lot for that introduction, and there is a lot to talk about in this topic. And just for some context, Vattenfall, we're committed to enable fossil-free living within 1 generation. And I think the tragic events in Ukraine just means that these commitments are even more important for other reasons on top of climate. And in 2021, we refined our climate targets, and we now commit to the 1.5 degree trajectory, and also commit to becoming net zero by 2040. And I think that's, of course, a reflection of our values and our commitment to the climate, but we're also very, very convinced that this is actually a great guiding star to keep us competitive as a utility. We think that having these very ambitious climate commitments will make us take better commercial decisions. And that I think is something that's important to understand. And as I mentioned, enabling fossil-free living, that of course we can do the energy part, but we need to do it together with partners. And we work very, very actively with partners. And I think that's already been mentioned a couple of times, the fossil-free steel and our cooperation within Hybrid, which is the Vattenfall, us, and then LKAB, a leading mining company, and SSAB, a leading steel company. And so we have the ambition to make the whole value chain fossil-free. And I think that's very important, talking about partnerships and how, coming a bit to your question on what we can do in a cross-Atlantic perspective, because I think to solving many of these real climate issues, you have to take the full value chain perspective, because it's just too daunting of a task to do it, to drive the whole thing from one part of the value chain. You have to have the totality, and you have to be able to look left and look right with your partners, and then we say, now we do it together. And that is a big, I think, learning that we made in Hybrid, but also in other industry partnerships in Sweden, because we have another one, partnership called High Skies, but it's less well known, but with the aim is to produce electric fuels for airlines, air fuels at the scale. And that also, we work together with Shell, a technology provider, and an airline. And then you have the full value chain, and you have the certainty that, and coming back to also then my comment on First Movers Coalition, because the whole value chain, of course, the absolutely crucial final step to dare to take these quite big investments is that you know that there is demand. And that's why we truly support First Movers Coalition, because I think that's a very powerful way to create this demand. And we've committed to trucking, aviation fuel, and also steel, and we'll probably move into also chemicals as that part of the cooperation matures. So what can really be done here is that I think let's try to form some cross-Atlantic partnerships, and that way we can make the development move even further, because I think we have a lot of things that we learned in as you mentioned, Sweden is quite advanced in many aspects, but I think there are many things that we can connect to on the other side of the Atlantic and really make a very, very powerful alliance. Thank you.
Thank you. Interesting to talk about markets. Emma, you're in the charging station and battery businesses sector. Is the American market, or the North American market, I should say, Canada, the US, and Mexico, a really important market for you? And are there barriers to your reaching out to it?
How to answer that? I mean, of course, it's an important market. It's a very important industry market, and it has a lot of very nice automotive companies. We've also understood and invested in the Silicon Valley, the California company Cuberg that we are working with. So from innovation perspective, very interesting. And are there barriers? I mean, I think that currently, to be honest, I think that our barrier is that we need to build out the factory fleet that we have planned for here in Europe before we engage in anything else. We have a pretty full plate here. But all in all, of course, it's interesting. The Western world is far ahead and has a great tradition in this industry, and needs this transition and needs to take a leading role in it.
The European vehicle electrification market was in a little bit of a lull for a few years, and now all of a sudden is accelerated dramatically. How does that? How do you see that? Where do you see that going?
I mean, I see that I've been in Northvolt for 5 years now. The company was launched in April 27, as you know, and at that time there was no real European supply chain. It was a debate whether batteries would actually, in total, deliver on a better footprint for cars. So there was a lot of discussion on that. There was a lot of dependence on Asia. And there was also a lot of challenges across the supply chain for the entire battery industry. It was complex. The battery as such is complex. And it was a little bit difficult for the industry to understand what they wanted in terms of sustainability, but also performance and quality. And we decided already from the beginning that we wanted to drive this transition and take a leading role in Europe. And as doing that in Europe, taking that leading role, we had then the opportunity to drive our sustainability targets across the market. And then also included in that, we needed to take a little bit of a bigger bet, because as I said before, battery supply chain was complex. A lot of the materials were traveling around the globe. Components were difficult to get hands on, and also equipment, actually. So we needed to find a good way to control the supply chain in a better way. So we decided to go more upstream, meaning that we do a lot of the material preparation ourselves, meaning that we can have a closer collaboration with the mines and the material providers. And this means we do more than a typical battery factory. Added to that, we also get a bigger advantage in the carbon footprint and in circularity. And circularity in all aspects. I mean, we do recycling at the end of life, but we also do local recycling. And that in total also has a very big impact on the carbon footprint of the products. And that in its turn, we expect to be setting a new standard. So we expect that deciding where to produce materials strategically will be based on a decision related to carbon footprint. And as Andreas mentioned, the new steel industry is going to be formed in the same way, perhaps. We definitely see that happening now in northern Sweden with the hybrid moving in. And I think that is going to be a trend also for other industries. The advantage for us was that there was a transition coming that was needed and wanted by the end consumers. And we had the opportunity to really build this new base industry in a completely different way than it was in Asia at the time.
Thank you. Let me turn to Director General Andren. How do you see, where are the biggest opportunities for U.S.-Sweden cooperation here that you see? And I'd like to pursue the conversation that Emma started about supply chain. Supply chain for renewable energy seems to be a subject that is, if it wasn't going to come to the top of climate discussion, it certainly has with Ukraine.
Yes, indeed. Well, thank you, George, and also thanking the Atlantic Council for hosting the event. And I'm both glad and proud to be here because with the good colleagues, because this is an important launch for us for many reasons. And I just to start by saying that one reason was made clear by the initial speakers about climate change is a global threat. No single entity can solve this on its own. So you need cross-border cooperation across all kinds of borders, not only national ones. And we need more and deepened partnerships. And as was pointed out by the minister, Sweden has very ambitious green political goals. We have an industry that has taken the lead and also in the forefront when it comes to the clean energy transition, as was pointed out by both Andreas and Emma. We are a highly ranked innovative nation, and we have a vast history of private-public partnerships. And I'm bold enough here to say that Sweden is a good partner to join up with if you want to speed up the green transition. So I see a lot of opportunities where Sweden can actually support the US important route to have a clean green transition. And I think that is what this green transition initiative is about. It's about partnership. It's about positioning Sweden to be able to facilitate and help the US ambitions when it comes to the clean energy transition. And the main objectives of the initiative, of course, is to be a key partner to the US in the climate transition, as I said. And it's also about promoting Swedish small and medium-sized enterprises to be able to find partners in the US and to be able to, should we say, increase and deepen the collaboration when it comes to innovations and research, and also for deploying green innovative solutions. I think here Sweden is a good testbed country for many of the innovations that are actually being developed at the moment. And we have a history of testing and deploying large scale and new techniques and solutions. So I think that is one thing that we want this initiative to facilitate and speed up. And as you said, George, I think if the COVID pandemic somewhat was a starting point for many industries, for the financial market in some respects to try to speed up its green transition. I think that the horrific Russian war in Ukraine is a wake-up call for many governments. And I hope that what we would see now is a repowering the European Union, not at least, to move from a fossil-based dependency to a fossil-free energy system.
Well, I hope that's the narrative that emerges from this, that we shouldn't go slower, we need to go faster in the transition. Genevieve, you're sort of at the heart beat of innovation. Let me ask you whether international, Robert talked about Sweden being a great test bed for a lot of innovation, to take it off the bench or even out of the initial project and into scale. How much does international cooperation help in moving innovation up to the point where it can actually be tried out at a large scale?
Yeah, I think I've been working on international collaborations more directly for a little over a year now. I do work at the National Renewable Energy Lab, which is one of the national labs that supports the Department of Energy. And a priority for the Biden administration has been the collaborations, both with the labs and academia and industry, but also now there's a big focus on international. One of the keys and I work in hydrogen systems, for kind of developing the hydrogen infrastructure is driving down the cost of hydrogen. As Julie mentioned earlier, there's the Hydrogen Energy Earthshot, which is aimed at making it $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. And so I think the key on the international collaborations is that we need to make hydrogen a commodity that can be transferred market to market. And so that causes, or that is, what's needed in that is aligning the safety codes and standards, working on protocols for equipment so that they can be moved from one market to another, as well as trade of hydrogen and other goods on that. So I think, international collaboration is totally key. One is driving the deployment of the different hydrogen infrastructures from production through end use. And as has been noted, these need to happen in coordination. You can't have one without the other. And so, we need to see a lot more deployment. But then the other part of that is that in some cases, the use of hydrogen, especially in things like industrial processes, it's not just a matter of putting green hydrogen into the process and having it work the same. A lot of these processes require the carbon from the fossil fuels. And so it's also a matter of developing new processes that are clean for those industries. And that includes the steel making, ammonia production, chemical synthesis, and other things. I see, two of the main areas that the U.S. is very interested in is in transportation, the heavy and medium duty trucking and aviation. And that requires the infrastructure for refueling. One of the things we're working at on the lab with a international partnership is high throughput refueling, which is 10 times the current, what you're seeing with the light duty refueling infrastructure. So it's a big step up. And then the other part is getting data from these kind of new pilot demonstration projects so that we can identify where are the research gaps, where are the gaps in knowledge, and being able to kind of use that to guide research that we can do across the Atlantic.
Thank you. Well, when we talk about international cooperation, John, CalSTART has been a pioneer for well over a decade, has been promoting vehicle electrification from California base. And now certainly things are starting to move, but much more in Europe than in the US. And you've recently pioneered organized international MOU on medium and heavy duty truck progress, electrification, that actually is, if it's becomes more of an international standard is going to put enormous pressure on the U.S. to move much faster. Could you say a word about that? You're mute, I think, still.
Sorry about that.
Thanks.
It's an honor and a pleasure to be here today, and just want to say that it's a particular honor to be part of this Atlantic Council event. We have on our staff a veteran of the U.S. Army who's participating in the Atlantic Energy Fellowship Program. Jennifer Manfre's on our staff, so we have a particular great linkage with the Atlantic Council. CalSTART is a national organization. We have over 300 member companies all focused on building the clean transportation industry. And over the years, we've had so much success, particularly in building the commercial vehicle sector and seeing the technology advance, that we're now have launched a global effort. And the global effort really is based on the belief that we can get to carbon neutrality in the commercial vehicle sector, in trucks and buses, and the off-road vehicle segment by 2045. We do think that the technology is advancing very quickly, that there are zero-emission technologies, both batteries and hydrogen, that can get us there. We started here in California and got the state of California to commit to targets of 30% of all new commercial vehicle sales being zero emission by 2030 and 100% by 2040. So those are basically the same goals now that 15 other nations have signed up and committed to, and we are now working with them to achieve those goals. Not yet on that list is the nation of the United States, and we hope to move them toward there. And we also have very strong participation from other Scandinavian countries. So this is a great opportunity, George. It's one of the particular benefits of cleaning up commercial vehicles and from a greenhouse gas perspective and going zero emission is that the people who typically live where diesel trucks operate today are low-income areas. So those communities have been historically heavily impacted by air pollution and disproportionately, having illnesses resulting from the air pollution. So it's really critical that we move ahead and move the sector not only to address the climate threat, but to help those historically heavily impacted communities. So it's a great opportunity. And I'll just say one point here, and this, what we're talking about here relates very much to the Green Transportation Initiative and US and Sweden collaboration. In California, we were able to get $45 million in state funding to help the Volvo Group deploy its electric trucks here in Southern California. The CEO of Volvo Group said that funding fundamentally altered the company's strategy, and they began to move their electric vehicle product to the U.S. 2 to 3 years ahead of schedule. And so they are now, they've deployed those trucks, and they are now taking orders for those vehicles. And there is incentive funding right now in the state of California for fleets to buy Volvo zero-emission trucks. And one last point is I want to really call out Scania, which is the one global manufacturer to endorse the global MOU, the only one so far. So the Swedish company, Scania, really deserves a lot of praise for its leadership, saying, we believe in this market, we believe in zero-emission technologies, we can make it happen.
Thank you. Let me throw out to either Robert or Andreas, if you still have a few minutes, talk for a minute about the hybrid, and Sweden's really at the forefront of efforts to make low carbon, zero carbon steel, but there has to be a market for that to make that go in the long term. What are the strategies and levers to create a market for clean steel that will ultimately, justify the increased price?
I think that's a very interesting question. And if you had asked me that 5 years ago, we were truly worried about, or no, I wouldn't say worried, but there was a big question about how will we create the necessary demand for something that at the time we also expected to be quite a number of percentages more expensive. I think there are a couple of changes that have happened since then. One is that I think at least in Europe, the CO2 price has come up quite dramatically, meaning that the cost disadvantage is, I mean, it's questionable whether it's there at all anymore. So that's one part of it. But the other is as you get closer to realization and customers begin to realize that there will actually be fossil-free steel out there, then it switches more or less overnight. So I would argue that today, we still haven't actually built our first commercial plant, but I would argue that the order books are pretty full already. So there is a psychological thing that happens when you go from a conceptual thinking about fossil-free products to that they're actually in the market. And then I would say that demand comes very, very fast, at least the first parts of the segments of the markets. But that's all you need. Because if you think about this, a small part of the global market is far more than you need to put up a few plants or commercial-sized plants. And then, of course, I would add force movers coalition, which is an excellent tool to create that demand. So first of all, I think FMC is a great tool, but also I think one should, and it's, you can argue it's a bit when you go from, because if you go to procurement departments and you ask them, are you prepared to pay more for fossil free? It's in their DNA to say no, we want fossil free, but we're not going to pay more. That's how they are born raised, that answer. But at some point, other people in the organization start thinking about fossil free, and typically the CEO that talks to the capital markets and realizes that unless we go fossil free, the capital markets will doubt that we will survive. And then there is a completely different discussion. And I think Emma can. That's a bit, I think, what Northvolt did so well, that they figured that demand out and managed to convince the whole industry that batteries from Northvolt is the answer to the future, even though at the early date it didn't even exist. The plant didn't even exist. It's beginning to exist. So demand is a smaller problem than you at least initially believe. And first movers coalition is a great way to make that an even smaller problem.
Emma, could you just comment? Yes, Robert, please.
Yeah, from the public perspective, I think, like, what was it, 10 years ago, one of the CEOs of in the steel industry in Sweden said that it's impossible to do steel with fossil free. It's totally physically impossible. Today we know it's not. And I think that this is also a good evidence of how important public and private partnerships are, and what we can create if there is a risk sharing in the early stages of an idea, an innovative idea. The same goes with our support to Northvolt. I think it's important signals, and it's important for things to get moving. And today we see new companies coming up in the steel industry saying that they will do it. They will do it without any support from the public side, and I think that, okay, that's fine. That's the whole idea, is to get things going with a risk sharing from the public side. And I'm very pleased, and I'm so impressed also by what they are doing industry at the moment, as Andrea said, and also what Emma represents, of course.
Could you talk for a moment, Robert, about the Lead It coalition that Andreas mentioned? That's Sweden really helped kick off this idea from the kernel of low-carbon steel to try to build more of a global network focused on industrial decarbonization. How is that going to work with the Swedish-U.S. transition partnership? The U.S. joined Lead It, I think, right at the beginning, right?
Yeah, I think I was in the mission innovation process at the moment, at that time when the Lead It started to be discussed, where the focus on the hard to abate sectors were up and discussed, and some countries were they were more pro doing something together, and that's when the whole idea of the Lead It was born in a way. In order to say, well, let's do something. The countries that are on the forefront, that has industry that is also in the forefront. I think that we will see a deepened and a more perhaps clarified collaboration in the future. It's still early stages in some respects when it comes to the Green Transition Initiative. We are kind of, forming and see how we can dock into existing structures, existing cooperation. But I'm convinced that if Sweden and US are using the Green Transition Initiative the way we have planned it and discussed about it and the ambitions we have, I think that we can together then be crucial for the development in the LEAD-IT process.
John, what can the U.S. Truck industry and transit industry learn from what's happened and what's happening in Europe, or in China for that matter, but especially Europe, in terms of things that didn't help to accelerate this or interest people, or things that look like they're promising in some way or another?
Yeah, great question, George. The European Union has set really strong greenhouse gas standards for the commercial vehicle industry. I understand that those are up for review this year. Based on the progress of technology, I think there's no reason to back off on those standards. If anything, they could probably be even strengthened. I think the U.S. needs to make a similar commitment. I've been impressed with what the Biden administration has done so far on the light duty side by the president's executive order suggesting that 50% of sales in 2030 could and should be zero emission vehicles. And that's so that's for the passenger cars. And the agencies now are working toward regulations in that direction. Similar commitment has not yet been made for the trucking industry. And I think the U.S. needs to consider aligning with that. California has set that target now, and I believe we've got now 7 other states have followed along with California in pursuing those targets. A little less familiar with what Europe is doing in terms of the incentives, but currently we are working to try to get legislation passed so there are incentives for the purchase of zero emission trucks in the United States. There are currently tax credits if you buy an electric car, but nothing if you buy an electric truck, which doesn't really make sense. I am really pleased that Congress moved ahead in the federal infrastructure bill and increased the annual funding for zero emission buses to $1 billion. So I expect to see that market really move ahead. Europe is moving a lot faster on zero emission buses.
I don't think most people are aware that 80 or 90% of the costs of transit buses in the United States are paid for by the federal government. And if you simply leaned a little bit into suggesting that the federal government would want to reimburse transit systems for green buses, for carbon-free buses, rather than for diesel buses, it would create a bus industry. Now, hopefully, that's happening. How do you know in Europe whether, or maybe I can ask Robert as well, in Scandinavia, Northern Europe, is there a market for carbon-free buses, for electric buses, or to some extent for the potential of fuel cell and electric buses?
Well, what we see in Sweden, and I will focus on that, is that we see more or less an explosion on local cities and municipalities applying to us for subsidies in order to go electric when it comes to the buses used in the cities. And we now have, what is it, 140 million US dollars equivalents, roughly, that we are handing out yearly to make that swap when it comes to buses. So yes, and it's just growing. Applications are coming from small and big cities in Sweden, And I think that what we have seen is the same in some other countries that they are also on the route of having this kind of interest in swapping the fleets.
I want to make sure for those listening virtually that we'd be happy to take questions. I don't have any in the chat yet, but if we have a chance, we'd love to respond to them. Emma, is the range anxiety central problem to electrifying our car and light truck fleet going to get resolved before long? How do you see the development of the weight and power of batteries to be fueling a fleet that's suddenly has 300 to 450 mile range instead of a 200 to 300 mile range? And is that happening in Sweden?
I mean, there are two things happening when it comes to range stress in general. And I think that if you want to travel to the future and see what's happening, you can always go to Norway. And Norway had, I think, 95% EVs sold of the market this year so far. So it's a great example of where we are heading. I think that we see two things. Of course, we need to improve range. We need to improve performance in general in the batteries, and that will happen. It's a very, very new market and technology. But there is also, and now I speak for my own sake, the supercharging. And personally, I don't even think about it anymore. If we focus on the charging infrastructure, ensuring that there is always availability to charge, and that becomes as natural as filling gas in your engine, then it's not really that big of an issue. I myself have great availability to chargers. I drive EV about 1.5 hours in the morning, same in the evening. And in the beginning, when I just bought it, as anyone else, I was always checking charging in the vehicle. But nowadays, I just know where my chargers are, and if I need to refill, I refill. It's much smoother, and I think that we have a lot to do here, also in the less dense populated areas.
John.
George?
Yeah.
If I could just add to that, I think I think we're in the U.S. We're working on that on the light duty side. I think Tesla and maybe even in Europe has really set the gold standard for charging. That it really is a stress-free experience to be driving a Tesla. And what we really need to do is make sure that for all other cars, the user has that same experience. I just want to say, as part of the Green Technology Initiative, we have a program here in California where we have a partner, the Research Institute of Sweden, and we are working with them and others and the Electric Power Research Institute here in the United States to develop a megawatt scale charger. So basically you would allow for a truck to be able to get, say, 160 kilometers of range in about 10 minutes. So this is we're actually going to be building out prototypes of these charging systems here in the U.S. With the participation of RISE, the Research Institute of Sweden. And we hope that there perhaps could be a comparable deployment effort in Sweden. And I just want to say also, even just through the exchanges we've had so far in the last couple of weeks through GTI and getting to learn more about this effort, we're really excited to learn more about Northvolt and the good work that Emma and her team are doing, and really believe that the United States needs to really prioritize the development of the EV battery industry. We need to make sure that we're developing the whole supply chain responsibly with partners that we can trust, like Northvolt, and to move ahead. And we need to take a holistic approach on the entire supply chain, which I think Northvolt is doing and thinking about recycling. And that's going to be a really key part of that. There's just a huge economic opportunity, but also a great environmental opportunity to make sure that we do that right. And I think this is another great area of cooperation between the U.S. and Sweden. And I think the Biden administration really understands this. Secretary Granholm, it really understands the importance of developing the EV battery industry here in the United States and collaborating. The next big step would be to get our Congress to provide incentives to really encourage the manufacturing here domestically so that manufacturers just simply aren't going to the low-cost country.
Thank you. We have a question from a viewer about the...
May I comment
Yes,
just before?
please do, yeah. And then I'll
Is that
come to the
okay?
question.
So on that this is something we can collaborate on, and that we need to take a sort of broader grip on this. I think that one thing that we did in Europe, and that we also have a 5-year anniversary actually this year, is the European Battery Alliance. And that has been led by Vice President Maros Sefcovic. So it has a very high political acknowledgement. It's a team of companies venturing into the battery industry with the goal of setting standards for the European supply chain for the EV industry. So it's pretty broad. It has raw material suppliers. It has the OEMs as such. It has us as new battery companies and so on. And we meet regularly to discuss the regulation, standards, what's happening on the market, and so on and so forth, and really to boost that together as a team. And then if there is something corresponding in the US, I think that that's really something where we could collaborate from the European Battery Alliance together with the US, or at least us as Swedish companies can share and learn from such network.
You know, that's a fascinating observation, because my initial reaction is be a little bit hard to see that kind of thing happening in the U.S. Some of the biggest companies building brand new battery factories in the U.S. are not U.S. companies, and we don't have so much of a history of industrial policy of government helping to get U.S. companies that are in or want to enter into the business together, and then talk not only about how they can work together rather than simply compete, but how they can think about a coordinated supply chain, which is becoming not only increasingly important but essential. But it's a very interesting model. I'm sure people in the Biden administration are aware of it, but that would take a lot of public-private cooperation probably to launch that kind of thing in the U.S. The Department of Energy and the administration have launched some other not dissimilar. I mean, the hydrogen moonshot, for example, is an attempt to put money into developing, hubs, and it's working with cities and with industry, with markets all together to try to create a hydrogen economy to the extent that that's possible under existing law. So the idea of, I don't know, are you familiar, John, with the battery moonshot? Is that something that has a new vitality for U.S. industrial policy or not?
George, I don't know that there's been a formal moonshot program created, but I do think that there's a change afoot in terms of industrial policy and how it's been viewed here. And really, what really comes to mind is the semiconductor industry. Everybody realizing how important that industry is, how the technology was developed here, and then somehow or another production moved overseas for many years. And now there's a significant effort underway with congressional direction to encourage onshoring and the rebirth of the semiconductor industry here in the United States. I'd really argue that EV battery industry is every bit as important as the semiconductor industry and should be given that same level of treatment and priority. And we don't want to be in a situation where we're like with oil over the years. And I was old enough to remember sitting in lines and being during the boycotts many years ago. And when oil was being withheld from the United States, we don't want to be in that position with EV batteries. So we want to be working with our partners overseas who are our friends and we can trust, but also really developing the resources here in North America. And I'm really excited about US companies having some of the best technology. And then the question is, how do we make sure those batteries with that best technology get built here?
We have a number of questions that relate to green tech and money. The first of which is, who should pay the green premium for green steel or green cement? I mean, is that ultimately going to be paid by the customer? Should the company have to absorb some of that? Right now, I guess often the government's going to pay that premium through a contract for difference or some sort of incentive that gets the first facilities built, even though the price point may be too high. Ultimately, how do you convince, if it's the customer who pays, how do you convince the customer to pay that premium? Robert, go ahead.
I can try in a way. It's a difficult question because I think it depends very much on what product it is and what would be conceived as a premium at the end of the day. But if you look at fossil-free steel, for instance, the calculations, and I don't have the exact figures as such, but I know that if you look at the end consumer, the one buying a car made by a fossil-free steel, being electric and thereby more or less, climate neutral, it's just a marginal extra cost for the end consumer, at least. So that is something that I think that we sometimes perhaps overrate how much it will be at the end of the day for the consumer. For having a sustainable product rather than an unsustainable product as such. But then again, you do not count the cost of actually having an unsustainable system. The environmental cost, the climate cost, and the social and economic effects from climate change, it's never in that economic calculation. So I think if you do that, then again, it will not be an extra premium at the end of the day at all, actually. But that's how I see it. But then you have to look at it from a bigger than just the pure economic perspective. May I just add one thing, George, since I have the screen? I think when we're talking about partnerships, I think that what I have seen, or what we have seen the last 5 years or so, is an increasing public-to-public partnership as well. Agencies, as we are doing with the Green Transition Initiative, are hooking up, saying that we need to work together actually to make it more easy for industry and private actors and for the innovative system to meet the public sphere with less voices. And also what we have seen is more private-to-private partnerships. And I think that, again, hybrid is a good example of that. And you see in the mobility sector where Daimler and Volvo are joining up. Those are competitors and are in a competition on the market, but they're still collaborating to an extent that we have never seen before. And I think that is very important to show and to highlight.
One of the questions from the audience is, can the Transition Initiative cooperate on supply chain on the raw materials for batteries and for other renewable energy components? Is there a way to since Sweden and the US are short on quite a number of strategic minerals and substances, can that be a subject of cooperation? And indeed, I suppose the question of whether there can be real transatlantic cooperation between the EU, European countries, and the U.S. on strategic minerals is a terribly important question.
Yeah, George, I'd be happy to respond to that. I think Emma mentioned earlier that the EU has really developed a strategic plan to develop the battery industry. They're 3 to 5 years ahead of the U.S. on that. Of course, China and South Korea have been targeting these industries for even longer. So I think there's a real need for the U.S. to prioritize this. And then I think it's a great area for collaboration between Sweden and the United States. And we really should be talking about how we can do more together on this front. I think it's a really rich area to explore in many ways.
An audience question was, can the Green Transition Initiative help to attract talent to green energy tech? And that's a really good question. Genevieve, you're on the inside of seeing how attractive it is, the market for people who are doing green energy technology. You must have visibility into, of course, other national labs, but also into industry you work with. How do you see that market right now? And can countries help in some way, to promote that market, a transition initiative like this?
Yeah, the green transition has been huge in terms of increasing the need for trained personnel and taking people. We've hired recently people out of the oil and gas into hydrogen, and I think a couple of the ways that we've been working on kind of those international partnerships are through the IEA. There's a education outreach group that allows for people who want to get into the industry to kind of communicate together and talk. And so they provide events that allow that kind of knowledge sharing. I think the other thing is that we're working from kind of on the government side. We have the H2 Twin Cities Initiative, which is a clean energy ministerial international collaboration. And that is aimed at kind of looking at supporting local cities and municipalities by giving them funding to help develop hydrogen roadmaps. And that allows them to kind of look at both the workforce needs, what infrastructure from production to, matching end use with the production for their particular regions. And that's all helpful for kind of increasing the green transition and the kind of the economic opportunities for people in that.
There's a question that might be for any of the four of you, I suppose, which is this question of how much stress is going to be put on the grid by rapid vehicle electrification. In Europe, in the US, I'm not sure that's a problem we face tomorrow, but clearly it's a challenge in the future if the market for electric cars goes up. Is that a problem that's going to be solved by the kinds of reforms that have to go into the grid anyway in the European grids, for example, for renewable energy? The grid modernization, just to be able to put more renewable energy into the grid, is going to be part and parcel of taking care of the extra load from transportation, from electric transportation? Or is this going to be a severe impediment to increasing electric cars and trucks on the road? And John, you're in this business a little, and Emma, so are you, but I suspect that those are big policy issues that are across Europe right now. We don't face them yet in the US, but we probably will. Well,
George, I'm happy to respond, though. I think Robert might be, as a head of Swedish Energy Agency, perhaps, best poised to answer this, but I'll just say that, we're now, electric vehicles, the latest wave of product really started over 10 years ago. And there was a sense that, boy, as these cars get deployed, there's going to be, demands on the grid, and we're going to have real challenges. That ended up being the biggest non-event ever. The utilities are quite adept at building out the system here. And then through pricing, you can really encourage off-peak charging. So I think I really am not worried about the grid being able to keep up. I think there are great opportunities for fleets as they look at their own energy and being able to use energy storage, renewable energy produced on site, and actually becoming more resilient with their own operations and perhaps even less dependent on the grid going forward. So there are some really interesting opportunities there. But I do think perhaps the one area that is of concern is in the cyber security area. And certainly with all the warfare we see on the cyber front these days, I think that's what I'm more concerned about than actual ability to provide the electricity.
Robert, let me ask you the same question, but tilted a little bit toward just the, increased integration and penetration of renewable energy. How much of a challenge is grid modernization in the EU and in Scandinavia and Northern Europe right now?
I would say that, modernization of the grid, that is a challenge in a way, because it's huge investments and it takes time to get the permits and everything as such. But I share the view of John. I don't see it as a big impediment. I see it as a challenge. But I think there are 4 other things that are key in order for the energy system or electricity system to become much more renewable and variable in production, and that is storage, energy storage. And there you have hydrogen, but you have also batteries. You will have cars; they are batteries on wheel, if you will. You have the issue of flexibility. And there are lots of flexibility mechanisms out there, actually, but they are not deployed in the way that they should be and could be. You have standardization. I think that is perhaps even the biggest thing at the moment. How will the charges look like? How will the infrastructure look like? And you have a huge number of developers of electric vehicles, but also the infrastructure for electrifying the cars and so on. And I think that those are things that we need to look into expeditiously. But I don't think that the grid as such will be the big challenge. But it is something that we have to, of course, simultaneously find solutions for when it comes to securing the availability of electricity.
John, you raising your hand, or?
Yeah,
go ahead.
I have.
And Genevieve,
and maybe,
too? Okay.
George, it'd be great to bring Genevieve into the discussion, because I do think one of the key issues, and which Robert hit on, is storage. As we go to 100% renewable energy, we get a lot of hydropower in the spring. We get the sun coming back. In the fall, hydropower is not there, and the sun starts to go away. So I think we do need to find better ways to store renewable energy for longer durations. I'm really excited about the bipartisan infrastructure bill and the funding for hydrogen hubs. We're going to be actively participating with some teams to pursue that hydrogen hub funding. And I think there will be some great opportunities to find ways to develop low-cost hydrogen and green hydrogen, completely green hydrogen, and then be able to store that. And then that hydrogen stored can then be that source of renewable energy during those times when there's not as much sun or hydropower. So I'm really excited about that. I think in many ways it may be the electricity sector that is the main user, of that renewable energy, hydrogen. And I think transportation can follow along. And I just also want to say that what I'm hearing a lot about in Europe is that it is their industrial policies on carbon emission reductions that is driving a lot of the production of hydrogen in Europe, so that they can then produce fossil-free steel and empower other industrial facilities through the use of green hydrogen.
Genevieve.
Yeah, this is a topic that I think about a lot. I think I agree, right now it's not much of an issue, the electric vehicles that are being deployed on the grid, and it's handling it. I think in the near term, probably the bigger question is there's an energy justice, of whether, if there's time of use rates for charging your vehicles, whether certain groups are going to be excluded from access to the electric vehicles is probably the near term, issue around that. Kind of in the more, midterm, I think the deployment of hydrogen and fuel cell technologies will actually support a lot of this by being able to be a variable demand on the grid and produce hydrogen, off hours and provide support for that. And then in the longer term, as was mentioned, it's, a lot of that is then the long duration energy storage, where you can have seasonal storage of hydrogen in order to meet your summer and winter demands, and kind of variation on that. And so I think, there's those three kind of levels. It's in the shorter term, it's making sure that, all sectors of the population have access to, electrified vehicles and other renewable pathways that way. And in the kind of midterm, then that's where hydrogen production, like through electrolysis and fuel cells, can support the grid. And then in the further term, it's that seasonal storage where you can really support the extremely high penetrations of renewable energy.
Coming back to where you started that answer and the sort of environmental equity, environmental justice aspects of charging levels and protocols, could you talk a little bit more about that? Because I think, one of the great attractions of electrifying the transit bus system quickly is the ability to clean up air in impacted communities and serve impacted communities with public transportation. So if the funding program is run with those criteria, you have a real opportunity to do something in advance environmental justice by electrifying transit fleets. If the cities are required to serve certain routes and so forth and charge certain fares or discounts. But you referred to more of an overall concern that I guess that, electric cars will become primarily cars of wealthy people, and that the inequality of the transportation will actually be made more serious by the ways in which electric car charging is arranged. Can you talk a little bit about the concerns there?
I can. I'm not an expert on EVs and the charging protocols, but I think there is always a little bit of a concern that, especially around time of use rates, where people may not have a choice of when they can charge it, depending on their kind of overall economic status and how they have to live their lives, whether that could potentially impact people. I totally agree that electrifying either with battery electric or fuel cell electric buses and transportation, will have a lot of benefits to a lot of these underserved communities where you're cleaning up the air pollution and water pollution that is being impacted in those areas by more dirty buses that are going through those areas. So I don't think I can totally answer about the energy equity, but I know it's a topic that I'm thinking about.
I think it's very interesting. Thank you. We only have a couple of minutes left. One question from the audience is about biofuels. Many European countries and the EU, I think, sort of have raced to say, look, the light fleet, we're going to electrify. We're not going to use hydrogen or fuel cells, maybe for trucks, but right now hydrogen is going to be for industrial decarbonization, and so we're going to go all electric. Whether that happens in the United States is not absolutely clear. The Japanese certainly have up to now pushed the idea that fuel cell light and medium duty vehicles may be a strategy. How do you see the whole emphasis on biofuels now, looking down the road a little bit, as a road transportation strategy? Is that still a viable strategy that people want to, governments and companies want to invest money in trying to come up with very advanced biofuels? Or are we just going to go electric for the next 10 years and then worry about biofuels later? Any thoughts about that, any of you, since we're into the transportation subject? Robert.
I could start. Yeah, because Sweden has been very vocal and very focused on saying that you need a pamphlet. You need electrification when it comes to the transport system, but also biofuels and also other solutions. And I think if you look at the whole transportation sector, I mean, you have the air sector and you have shipping. And I think that biofuels will have an important part to play in that transition towards climate neutral or not net zero emissions. So biofuels will be a part of the long-term strategy that we need to have. And then electrification will be perhaps more, as we go along, increasingly important when it comes to private cars and some at least road traffics and some ferries as well. But you need biofuels for sure for the whole system. I'm convinced of that.
Yeah, George, I would agree with Robert that I think we have a strong biofuels market here in the United States today. And I think we will need biofuels for quite some time, even if we are able to hit our target on the car market of hitting 50% of sales being zero emission by 2030, it still means we'll have more internal combustion vehicles sold this decade than electric. So to the extent that we can find sustainable biofuels that can be used more widely to service all the different types of internal combustion engine vehicles and aircraft and marine vessels, that would be great. We just need to make sure it's really done in a sustainable way, and we're not, cutting down rainforests, et cetera, to produce the biofuels. But I think there's still a robust market for it. We should continue to invest in still even further advanced biofuels. And just very quickly, just say that one of the things we learned from collaboration with Sweden in the early 2000s was the development of biogas, so what we call renewable natural gas. The Swedes were real leaders on that. We helped facilitate knowledge transfer from Sweden to California, and now that is one of the leading renewable fuels being used in California.
Emma, did you have a comment? You were smiling.
No, I don't know if I have a comment. I think that for the system perspective, I think that we already had the views from the more helicopter responsible people here in the panel. But one thing, and I just want to emphasize, when it comes to this, to the vehicles and the EV market, electrification of that industry is going to revolutionize more than just the sustainability. It's incredibly important for the sustainability. But once we have that streamlined system where you charge your vehicle, it's very clean. You don't have to transport any fuels. It's extremely straightforward. When the renewable energy is built out in that grid, it's going to be far cheaper than what we have today, because it's not about liquids on the market being transported across and so forth. The important thing for making that happen, to me, is to build out the system so that we can transport the clean power in time and in space. And when we manage that, I think that the electric vehicles are going to outperform by far any combustion engine. So then I think biofuels are important, but I do not believe in it for the car market, personal vehicles. But I'm happy to be challenged.
Well, we've talked about a lot of important subjects today, I think, and I think we're sort of at an end, so I really want to thank you all, the panelists, for joining this conversation, and also those of you who are still listening out there. I want to thank our partners, the Swedish Embassy and the Department of Energy, and also James Batchick, Maya Sparkman, and Juan Gomez for their efforts in organizing today's event. You don't see behind the scenes. If you want to re-watch these website, the stream or the program, you can find a recording on the Atlantic Council site and the YouTube channel. So thank you very much. And
George,
those out there.
may I just...
Yeah, please, go ahead.
Being one of the initiating this initiative, let me just say that please get in contact with any of us, Business Sweden, Swedish Energy Agency, or Vinnova, or the Embassy of Sweden, and if you're interested in this and being a part of the GTIE and further and deepen our collaboration, so don't hesitate. Please get in contact with us.
And those
Thank you so
listening,
much.
we'll make it easy. So thank you all.